So I just finished the new event for Genshin Impact version 4.2. Well, I guess we can't really call it new because it's going away in like 3-4 days. Thelxie's Fantastic Adventures event. Just decided to finish it about an hour ago on Twitch because that's where we're gonna do these event stories from now on. But we still had like a discussion of something relating to a speculation, I guess, of lore that randomly popped up, and I decided to put this here. The story was sad, but it was also heartwarming at the same time. But what I was trying to figure out was, how was it that the penguin, Thelxie, able to portray the emotions of the sun near the ending cutscene?
Paimon, do you know what the Madame said? She said that at the moment when she placed the crown on Thelxie's head, she felt like she really saw something beautiful. Her child had returned, and he told her that he loved her.
Now the bigger question is, what's with the penguin? Number one, the penguin has some kind of soul attached with the sun. Or number two, oh, is it because of the shells? Maybe like the soul and the spirit, the leyline memories of the sun was inside the shells, and because we put the shell together to create Thelxie, it kind of like transfer over into this weird spiritual leyline energy kind of thing. That is my only explanation. It's either that or the module that allows Thelxie to speak is just like a super genius AI. So what this basically means is that perhaps if the leyline is affecting Thelxie with the consciousness of the sun, I mean, we've seen that happen multiple times in the past in several other events, so it feels like it's possible. What this means is basically, if that's the case, everything about the leyline affects what is real and what is fantasy. In my perspective, in my speculation, it means that because leyline exists in Teyvat, that essentially is what is portrayed as fantasy, a fake, a simulation, something like that. And what's beneath or not associated with the ley lines is reality.
But if fantasy is just fantasy, and the fantasy world is not real, then how could it still grant us these powers that we can continue to use in the real world?
Oh, it all makes sense. It's leyline. It has to be. There's no other explanation. Because we can see leyline distortions or whatever. That means the entire world of Teyvat, as we assumed, is all a fantasy because of the leyline. So are we in reality, or are we in the dream this entire time because of the existence of leylines? Ooh. Because remember, it makes more sense if you think about it. In the very beginning of this event quest, they talked about the leyline. Fermine, I think, specifically said, in terms of the illness, that he doesn't know, maybe it was caused by the leyline. Didn't he say that? Something like that? That might have just been a hint that what we're suspecting could be very true. Yeah, because if he didn't mention it, it would be kind of like a shot in the dark and copium. But he mentioned it, and that's like a pretty, like a hint.
A descent of the fairy tale world into the real world. At that time, the wondrous fairy tale temporarily became reality and influenced real things in our world. That has to be what happened.
So basically that means leyline is affecting this entire world as a fantasy world. But what is reality? Reality is basically what is hidden behind the leylines. Reality is what the Celestia is trying to hide. See? It all makes sense in the bigger picture. So how can we even believe in leylines with the whole situation with the tree and stuff? Because that makes sense why that can be rewritten. That's why the memories of the leylines can be rewritten, because the entirety of the leyline and this world is like a changing fantasy story. Wait, this also makes sense with the Melusines, because they perceive things differently. We perceive things in a leyline fashion, but they see complete opposite. Oh, wait, does this mean they have the ability to look through the ley lines and see what's reality? Or is it the other way and vice versa? I don't know. Interesting. Leyline doesn't go into the abyss, right? I think that was the lore. But then Irminsul and all that stuff, I guess it doesn't exist in the abyss, which if that's the case, then that makes sense. That's why in the abyss, there's no concept of like Teyvat leyline elemental energy for like, I guess maybe visions. They use the other thing, the power from beyond instead. What if the dogs from Abyss is actually dogs and they came to this world corrupted, but in reality it's just how creature breaks the illusion of ley lines? I am assuming it's like this. The dogs come through a portal. Maybe that's the ability that they have, where it's like they're basically ripping through the dimensions as their reality self, rather than being portrayed as the fantasy ley line setting of Teyvat. So let's say everything we perceive in Teyvat is fake. Like the fantasy. It's made believe. It's a simulation. And for instance, things from the Abyss, like the dogs, that's actually their true self, but they retain their form because they come through a rift. Does that make sense? Like they have this random abyssal ability where it retains their true self, and that's why we perceive them the way we do, even inside Teyvat. Now, this might get really interesting if we think about the lictors and heralds as well, or just the abyssal transformation in general, where they have the ability to kind of change between their abyssal form and the human form. Child, for example. So essentially, if you have the abyssal power, it gives you the ability to not be affected by the ley lines or the false context or pretext or perspective of Celestia, if that makes sense. So Child is like an example of one of them. He has the ability to go between like a human form and the abyssal transformation form. And if we go really far back, Enjo had something very similar, which is interesting because he was able to transform between the human form and the abyssal form. Now, does this all relate to the Clothar situation? Or does this relate to Daneslav's, what's his name? Halfdan situation? I don't know, I just thought it was very interesting. This is some Alice in Wonderland type of shit. A descent of the fairy tale world into the real world. At that time, the wondrous fairy tale temporarily became reality and influenced real things in our world. The wondrous fairy tale temporarily became reality. The dimension has like, the rift was open. Like, metaphorically. And influenced real things in our world. Here's the interesting part, chat. This event story portrays, let's call it dimensional rift ripping in a very metaphorical sense, right? Basically reality and fantasy, but this event is portraying it in a very positive light, right? Through Zuria and like the sun and everything. But if this is true and our speculation about the abyss is true and the ley line, it's kind of backwards if we perceive it from Teyvat, right? You could say like the abyss is bad, but then what is actually bad? What is worse? Harsh reality or white lies? It really depends on everybody's own perceptions. Like the situation, the intent, and everything behind it. They all come together to help you make your own decision whether it was like one is good or one is bad. That's the whole point of this game. So can we say, like for instance, the Abyss dogs or Durin or everything in the Abyss, are they even bad? You could say they're bad in the perspective of this beautiful world in Teyvat and what Celestia is trying to like maintain. But then they reverse, if it's a lie this entire time, then which is it? What is good? And I love how this event is painted in the positive direction, but in reality, the world of Teyvat is the actual, you can perceive it as actually the opposite. And you know what the best part about this is? Entirety of Fontaine is based on illusions. Whoa!